The kitchen was cloaked in a muted twilight, the last remnants of daylight filtering through grimy windows and casting long shadows that stretched across the worn wooden floor. Mara stood by the sink, her fingers clenched tightly around a chipped mug, knuckles white with quiet tension. The cold air of the room seemed to press in on her, the faint howl of wind rattling the window panes like a whispered warning. Across from her, Eli sat at the rickety table, his gaze fixed on the darkened surface, eyes distant and hollow. The silence between them was thick, suffocating, a heavy weight neither dared to break. "Mara," Eli said finally, his voice rough and dry, like a land long parched. "I'm doing what I have to, for us, but it's tearing us apart," Mara replied, her voice trembling with a mixture of frustration and pain. "You're shutting me out. Every day you disappear further into the fields and that cursed soil. You don't sleep, you don't eat properly, and when you're here, you're somewhere else entirely." Eli's jaw tightened, a flicker of anger flashing beneath his weariness. "You don't understand. This land, it's hungry. It's not just soil and seed anymore. It's alive in a way I never wanted it to be." Mara's eyes sharpened, her steady presence cracking beneath the strain. "And what about us? What about Sarah? The farm means nothing if we lose everything else. You promised me we'd face this together. But you're alone in this, Eli. You won't let me in." He looked up then, a haunted shadow crossing his face. "I'm trying to protect you, to protect all of us. But the more I fight it, the more it demands." The tension snapped like a brittle twig. Mara's voice rose, raw with emotion. "Protect us, by sacrificing yourself, by losing yourself to this madness. I'm scared, Eli. Scared of what this land is turning you into, and what it might take from us all." Eli's hands clenched into fists on the table, his knuckles pale. "I can't stop now, not when we're so close. If I give up, this will all be for nothing." Mara's face crumpled, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I don't want to lose you. Not like this." He reached out, but she pulled back, the distance between them more than just physical. Later that afternoon, Eli found himself alone in the fields. The sun dipping low and setting the horizon ablaze with burning gold and blood-red hues. He knelt down, fingers digging deep into the earth, feeling the damp, loamy soil crumble beneath his calloused hands. The scent of earth, rich and dark, filled his nostrils, mingling with the sharp tang of sweat and exhaustion. He whispered apologies, not just to the land that demanded so much, but to Mara, to Sarah, to every fragment of his fractured family. "I'm sorry," he murmured, voice breaking in the quiet. "I'm trying to save us." But the soil offered no comfort, only a cold, unyielding hunger that seemed to pulse beneath his touch. Inside the house, Mara paced restlessly, the weight of isolation pressing down on her chest. Days had passed since their confrontation, and though Eli was physically present, the emotional chasm between them had only widened. Their conversations had dwindled to terse exchanges, shadows of what they once were. Fear gnawed at her heart, fear not just of the curse, but of losing Eli to the darkness that seemed to swallow him whole. One evening, the tension broke anew in a heated argument that shattered the fragile calm. Voices rose, sharp and raw, echoing through the small rooms like thunderclaps. "You're unraveling, Eli," Mara said, tears streaming down her face, voice thick with anguish. "This obsession is destroying everything. I don't know how much more I can take." Eli's eyes, wild and haunted, met hers. "I'm doing this for us. For the farm, for Sarah. You don't understand what's at stake. And what if it consumes you?" she demanded, What if it takes you away from me, from her? What then? A silence fell, heavy and suffocating, broken only by the distant creak of the old house settling. Mara's sharp gaze searched his face, desperate for a trace of the man she loved beneath the haunted shell. The days that followed were quiet but brittle, each moment weighted with unspoken fears and fragile hope. Mara found herself sitting on the porch steps as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in strokes of crimson and violet. The fields stretched out before her, silent and watchful, the cursed earth dormant but ominous. She wrapped her arms around herself, the chill of evening seeping through her clothes. The silence between her and Eli was a chasm filled with grief, love, and uncertainty, a fragile peace that could shatter at any moment. As darkness fell, Mara whispered a prayer for strength, for love, and for the man she still believed was buried beneath the shadows of the cursed land. The harvest of ashes had begun, and the price was yet to be fully revealed. But somewhere deep inside, a flicker of hope remained, fragile and flickering like a candle struggling against the night. The morning sun had barely touched the horizon when Eli Grayson loaded his truck with a heavy resolve. Today, he would seek answers beyond the confines of his cursed farm. The village of Black Hollow, with its peeling paint and shuttered windows, was waking slowly, but Eli's heart pounded with urgency. He knew the soil's hunger wasn't just his burden, it was a secret shared by the community, buried beneath layers of fear and silence. As Eli entered the town square, the air felt thick with unspoken tension. The few early risers glanced at him warily, their expressions tight and guarded. He stopped in front of the town hall, its faded sign creaking in the gentle breeze. Gathering his courage, Eli pushed open the heavy wooden door, stepping into a room where the air was stale and shadows clung to every corner. Inside, a small group had assembled: farmers, shopkeepers, and a few townsfolk Eli recognized from years of passing nods and half smiles. But their eyes avoided his, fixated instead on the dusty floor or the cracked plaster walls. Eli cleared his throat, his voice breaking the heavy silence. "We can't keep pretending the land's hunger is just bad luck. It's something darker, something we all know." His words hung in the air, met by a wall of silence thicker than the morning fog. An elderly woman, her hands trembling, whispered, "Best not to speak of it, Eli. Some things are better left buried." The murmurs swelled like a rising tide, a collective shroud of denial that wrapped around the room. Eli's chest tightened. The curse was no longer his secret. Alone it was a weight shared, yet unspoken. Later, in the somber light of the local diner, Eli found Sheriff Dalton nursing a black coffee. The sheriff's eyes, sharp and calculating, bore into Eli with a mix of skepticism and reluctant concern. "You're chasing ghosts, Grayson," he said gruffly. "People don't like digging up old stories. It makes them uneasy." Eli leaned forward, voice low but firm. "This isn't just stories, Dalton. The land's bleeding, and so is my family. We need to face it, or we'll lose everything." Dalton's jaw tightened. "I've heard things, strange noises, missing livestock. But folks around here fear what they don't understand. You're pushing too hard, Eli. Be careful." The sheriff's caution underscored the invisible barrier between Eli and the rest of Black Hollow, a barrier of fear and silence that threatened to swallow him whole. Determined, Eli sought out Tommy Hale, the town's historian, in his cluttered study filled with stacks of dusty tomes and yellowed maps. Tommy looked up from a weathered manuscript, eyes gleaming with a mix of excitement and dread. "You want to know the truth about the land? It's all here, buried in the past," he said, sliding a faded journal across the table. Eli traced the fragile pages, reading accounts of rituals, sacrifices, and pacts made long before his time. The air smelled of aged paper and forgotten memories. Tommy's voice trembled as he spoke of the ancestral sins that had cursed the soil, binding the town in a cycle of blood and silence. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Eli wandered the empty streets alone. The village was cloaked in a heavy silence, the kind that gnaws at the soul. Shadows stretched long and ominous, whispering secrets only the cursed earth could hear. Each step felt heavier, the isolation pressing down like the thick earth beneath his boots. The townspeople's refusal to confront the curse left Eli stranded in a growing void. Their silence was a barrier, their fear a shackle. Yet within that isolation burned a fierce determination. He would break the silence, confront the darkness, and fight for the land and family he loved, even if it meant standing alone against the shadows. As night fell, the wind carried faint whispers through the street's echoes of the past, warnings, or perhaps the earth's own mournful cry. Eli stood at the crossroads of desperation and resolve, knowing that the true battle was only beginning. "They won't speak," he muttered to himself, the weight of the town's silence settling like ash around him. "But I will." The late afternoon sun filtered weakly through the grimy windows of Tommy Hale's study, casting long, dusty beams over stacks of brittle books and scattered papers. The room smelled faintly of must and old wood smoke, a cramped sanctuary where the past was preserved in fragile pages and whispered secrets. Eli Grayson sat stiffly on a creaking wooden chair opposite Tommy's cluttered desk, watching as the local historian carefully unfolded a yellowed manuscript. "This," Tommy said, adjusting his round spectacles and pointing to a faded illustration, "is what I found buried deep in the county archives. A ritual tied to the very soil beneath Black Hollow away to break the curse, if it's performed exactly right." Eli leaned forward, his tired eyes scanning the cryptic symbols and archaic text. The words spoke of ancient offerings, sacred fires, and a circle drawn in blood and salt to sever the bond between the cursed earth and the sacrifices it demanded. "And you think this will end it?" Tommy hesitated. "It's the only lead we've got. But it's dangerous. The soil isn't just land, it's a living thing now. Angry, hungry. The ritual calls for more than just faith. It demands courage and sacrifice." A heavy silence settled between them, punctuated only by the slow ticking of an ancient clock on the wall. Eli's mind raced not just with hope, but with the chilling realization of what might be required. That evening, Eli found himself standing in the fields as dusk bled across the sky, the twisted shadows of withered crops stretching long and ominous. Kneeling, he traced the faint outlines of an arcane symbol into the damp earth, his fingers trembling as the soil seemed to pulse with a life of its own beneath his touch. A cold wind swept through the stalks, carrying whispered voices that teased the edge of his sanity. The air thickened, charged with a strange energy that sent a shiver down his spine. He closed his eyes, willing himself to believe that this ritual could sever the dark bond that had haunted his family for generations. Back in the dim kitchen, Mara's face was drawn and pale beneath the flickering lamplight. The tension between them was palpable as they sat across the rough-hewn table, the weight of their reality pressing down like a stone. "Eli," Mara said quietly, her voice trembling but resolute, "this ritual, if it's real, it's dangerous. Are you sure we can survive the cost?" He met her gaze, weary but determined. "I don't know, but if I don't try, we're finished. The land's hunger is growing, and Sarah, she's getting worse." Mara reached out, gripping his hand tightly. "Then we face it together. But promise me you won't lose yourself in this." Before Eli could answer, the ground beneath the farmhouse trembled violently, a deep rumble that seemed to rise from the very roots of the cursed earth. Outside, the sky darkened rapidly as swirling clouds gathered overhead, the wind rising into a frenzy that rattled windows and sent dead leaves skittering across the porch. The soil beneath the fields writhed, roots twisting like grasping hands beneath the surface. An eerie whispering filled the air, a sinister lullaby that wrapped around Eli like a cold, suffocating embrace. He stood, heart pounding with dread and resolve. The ritual was no longer a distant hope, it was a desperate necessity. But as the storm gathered, Eli knew the path ahead was fraught with peril. The roots of the past were tangled deep, and unearthing them might unleash horrors beyond anything he had yet faced. With a final glance toward the darkened horizon, Eli steeled himself. The cursed earth demanded reckoning, and he was ready to meet it no matter the cost. The night stretched long and heavy, the silence between the whispers pregnant with the promise of a reckoning. Eli's resolve hardened like the stubborn soil beneath his feet, and as the first distant crack of thunder echoed through Black Hollow, the farmer prepared to confront the darkness rooted in his family's legacy. But deep within the earth, the cursed soil waited, hungry and watchful, ready to test the limits of sacrifice and survival once more. The sun dipped low behind the rolling hills of Black Hollow, casting long shadows across the parched fields of the Grayson farm. Eli stood at the edge of the withered corn rows, his knees sinking slightly into the cracked earth. The soil, once rich and teeming with life, now felt cold and heavy, as if burdened by some unseen weight. He knelt, pressing his palms into the dirt. There was a subtle vibration beneath his fingers, a pulsing rhythm like the beat of a distant heart. The whispers he had heard before seemed to rise from the ground itself. Voices carried on the wind, soft, insistent, demanding. Behind him, the farmhouse creaked as the evening breeze slipped through cracked windows. Mara's voice floated faintly, calling for Eli to come inside. But he remained rooted, unwilling to turn away from the land that had both nurtured and cursed his family for generations. Inside, the kitchen was bathed in the pale glow of a single flickering candle. Mara sat at the worn wooden table, her hands wrapped tightly round a steaming cup of tea. Across from her, Sarah lay curled beneath a threadbare blanket, her cheeks ghostly pale, eyes dull and unfocused. The illness had come swiftly, a shadow creeping through the little girl's body, sapping her strength day by day. Mara looked up as Eli entered, her eyes searching his face for answers he did not have. "She's worse," Mara whispered, voice trembling. "The doctor says it's like nothing he's seen. No fever, no infection, just fading." Eli swallowed hard, the knot in his stomach tightening. "It's the land," he said hoarsely. "It's taking more than it should." Mara's gaze hardened, a mix of fear and disbelief. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, then unfolded the grim truth he'd uncovered. The soil beneath their feet was cursed, fed by blood and sacrifice from generations past. Now it demanded more. Not just the blood of the past, but life itself. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the window panes and carrying with it the faintest sound of voices, whispers of ancestors lost to the earth, warning, pleading, condemning. Eli could almost see the twisted roots beneath the surface, writhing like serpents hungry for their next victim. Determined to save his daughter, Eli returned to the fields at dusk, the sky painted in bruised purples and fiery oranges. He dug his fingers deeper into the soil, searching for a way to break the curse, to starve the land's dark appetite without giving in to its demands. But as night fell, the earth convulsed beneath him, a violent shudder shaking the ground so fiercely it threw him to his knees. He looked up to see the horizon alive with flickering shadows, the crops wilting and twisting as if in agony. Back in the farmhouse, Mara sat vigil beside Sarah's bed, her hand never leaving the girl's feverish brow. Eli's voice broke through the stillness. "We can't run from this. The land is hungry and it's taking her. I have to find a way to stop it." Mara reached out, gripping his arm with a desperate strength. "Whatever it takes," she said. "But promise me, Eli, promise me you'll come back." The night deepened, thick with dread and silence. The cursed earth waited patiently, insatiable, a beast beneath their feet. Eli knew the price of survival was rising, and soon he would have to pay the ultimate sacrifice. But the question lingered in the cold air. How far was he willing to go to save his daughter? And what would be left of his soul when the hunger was sated, if it ever was? The storm was coming, and with it, the harvest of ashes. The night wrapped Black Hollow in its cold, suffocating embrace as Eli Grayson trudged through his fields under a pale, ghostly moon. The soil beneath his worn boots seemed to thrum with a sinister heartbeat, pulsing in rhythm with his quickening pulse. A chill danced along his spine, and the wind carried faint whispers, voices from the deep earth, voices he could no longer ignore. Eli stopped, the ache in his knees momentarily forgotten as he knelt in the furrows, his calloused hands sinking into the damp, dark earth. The scent of rot and rain mingled with something iron-rich and raw, like blood spilled freshly upon the soil. His breath came in ragged gasps, and the air grew thick, almost viscous, as spectral shapes began to rise from the ground around him. The ghosts of his ancestors, pale and translucent, emerged, faces twisted in agony and regret, eyes hollow and aching with unspoken sorrow. Their voices, a chorus of anguish and warning, whispered through the rustling cornstalks. "Feed us," they murmured, "or watch the harvest fail." Eli recoiled, heart pounding as the visions seeped into his mind. These were not mere hallucinations. They were echoes of a terrible past, a covenant sealed in blood and desperation. Each ancestor had paid the ultimate price, their lives entwined with the cursed soil that now demanded more. Back inside the farmhouse, the dim glow of a kerosene lamp flickered over the worn pages of the family journal Eli had uncovered weeks ago. His fingers traced the faded ink, the cryptic entries filled with ritualistic instructions and accounts of sacrifices made in desperate times. The weight of generations pressed upon him, heavy and unrelenting. "You don't have to do this alone." Mara's voice cut through the silence, steady but edged with fear. She stood in the doorway, her sharp eyes searching his face, desperate to find the man she once knew beneath the growing shadow. Eli looked up, eyes bloodshot and haunted. "It's the only way," he whispered. "The soil, it won't stop. It's hungry." Mara stepped closer, reaching out but hesitating, as if afraid her touch might shatter him. "There has to be another way, Eli. This obsession is tearing us apart. Sarah's illness, the farm, it's all connected, but sacrificing more won't save us." Her words, laced with love and fear, collided with the storm raging inside him. He wanted to believe her, to turn away from the cursed legacy, but the voices from the grave pulled him deeper into darkness. That night, Eli sat by the hearth, the flickering flames casting twisted shadows on the walls. His mind swirled with visions, twisted roots like veins, blood-soaked hands digging into the earth, the land drinking deeply and never sated. The cursed earth was alive, a malevolent force born of ancestral sins and desperate bargains. Madness crept in, clawing at his reason. He saw faces in the firelight, felt hands grip his shoulders, heard the hungry whispers grow louder. The line between past and present, life and death, blurred until only the cursed soil remained real. As dawn broke, Eli's resolve hardened. The voices had shown him the terrible truth, and though despair threatened to consume him, a fierce, desperate determination took root. He would face the cursed earth, confront the legacy of blood and sacrifice, no matter the cost. But as Mara watched him, her heart heavy with sorrow, she knew the battle was far from over. The curse had taken hold, not just of the land, but of Eli's soul, and the price of breaking free might be more than either of them could bear. The haunted fields of Black Hollow whispered their ancient, dreadful secrets, and Eli Grayson stood on the edge of a precipice between salvation and ruin, sanity and madness, life and death. The harvest of ashes was coming, and nothing would ever be the same again.